It was a cold, relentless night in Silver Hollow. Rain poured over the empty road when, through the blur of headlights, a tiny, barefoot girl appeared, trembling, soaked to the bone, clutching a small wicker basket against her chest. Inside, a newborn puppy whimpered softly. Her name was Emily, a child too young to be out here alone. When the old pickup truck stopped, Jack Carter, a war veteran heading home, stepped out into the storm, and the little girl looked up at him and whispered, "I'll give you my puppy if you catch my stepfather." That one plea, spoken through rain and fear, would pull them both into a night of truth, danger, and quiet courage. What happened next will make your heart ache and believe again in the kindness of silent heroes. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below, and let's see where this story takes us. The storm that night in Silver Hollow was the kind that seemed to scrape the sky raw. Rain didn't fall. It attacked, a wall of cold water slashing through the dark as thunder rolled across the wide Montana hills like the growl of something ancient. The back road winding along the edge of town was nearly deserted, save for one old pickup truck pressing steadily through the downpour, its headlights carving weak tunnels of light through the curtain of rain. Behind the wheel sat Jack Carter, 42, tall and broad-shouldered, a man built by years of discipline and hard work. His skin was pale against the dim dashboard light, his short dark brown hair streaked with silver at the temples, droplets clinging to it whenever he turned toward the window. He wore a weathered olive green field jacket, dark blue jeans, and a black baseball cap with the word "Veteran" stitched in white across the front. His hands, scarred, steady, gripped the wheel with the calm focus of a man who had learned patience the hard way. Beside him sat Rex, his 6-year-old German shepherd, muscular and alert even in the cramped space of the passenger seat. The dog's black saddle of fur gleamed faintly under flashes of lightning, the tan chest and legs glistening with the fine mist of rain blown through the cracked window. His amber eyes tracked the world beyond the glass, every flicker of movement, every sound. His ears stood erect, always listening, loyal, disciplined, and alive with quiet intelligence. The two of them made an unlikely silhouette against the storm, a soldier and his dog, steady and silent, pushing forward through the night toward whatever waited in the darkness ahead. Lightning flashed across the horizon, and for a brief moment, the world outside the windshield came alive. Wet asphalt, bent trees, power lines trembling in the wind. Then, in that flicker of light, Jack saw something, small, pale, moving along the shoulder of the road. At first, he thought it was an animal, but as the headlights caught her again, his chest tightened. It was a child, barefoot, her thin legs splattered with mud, a short beige dress with tiny brown polka dots clinging to her knees, soaked through to the skin. Her blonde hair hung limp and heavy with rain, and in her arms she held something, a wicker basket wrapped in a torn piece of cloth. Jack's instincts took over. He slowed the truck and pulled to the side, his tires hissing in the floodwater. The rain hit him like needles as he stepped out. His boots splashed into the puddles, the sound almost swallowed by thunder. He lifted a hand to block the rain from his eyes as he approached her. The child stopped walking but didn't run, just stood there, trembling, clutching the basket tighter. Jack knelt down on one knee in front of her, the cold water seeping through his jeans. "Hey," he said softly, his voice roughened by wind and years. "You okay, sweetheart?" The little girl slowly raised her head. Her eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, wide with fear, lashes tangled with rain. Her lips trembled, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper against the storm. "I'll give you my puppy, if you catch my stepfather." For a moment, Jack didn't breathe. He blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. The wind howled, but her words lingered, small and raw, like a wound laid open. He lowered his head, peering into the basket she clutched. Inside, under the soaked piece of cloth, was a tiny German shepherd puppy, no more than 20 days old, its fur matted, its body shaking violently from the cold. Jack felt his throat tighten. He gently pulled off his glove, placing a warm hand over the basket to block the wind. "Hey there, little one," he murmured, then looked back to the girl. "What's your name?" The girl swallowed, her voice breaking as she spoke. "My name is Emily." She rubbed her nose with the back of her wet hand, eyes flicking toward the trees as if afraid someone might come out of them. "His name is Victor Hale," she said finally. He killed my dad. And then my mom disappeared." The words came out in fragments, trembling like her small frame. Jack felt the air leave his chest. Victor Hale. The name hung heavy in the rain. He had heard it somewhere before, whispered in town maybe, or buried in one of the sheriff's old case files. He didn't ask her to repeat it. Emily's story came out between sobs. She had waited until Hale passed out drunk, his snoring shaking the thin walls of the old trailer they lived in on the edge of town. She had hidden a spoon for days to pry open the back door. When she finally slipped out, she took only the basket, inside it, the small puppy, the last thing that hadn't been beaten or broken in that house. The rain had started soon after, and she had walked until her legs gave out, hoping someone would see her. "He'll wake up soon," she said in a small voice, her fingers clutching the jacket tighter. "He'll come for me." Jack nodded slowly, his jaw hardening. "Not tonight," he said. "You're with me now." He opened the truck door and lifted her in carefully. She was light, far too light for her age. Rex shifted to the side, making room on the seat. The old dog sniffed the girl once, then rested his head on her knee, his eyes soft and knowing. Emily froze at first, but when Rex gave a small sigh and closed his eyes, something in her broke loose. She let out a quiet sob, one hand burying into the dog's fur as if to hold on to life itself. Jack climbed in, started the engine, and turned the heater on full. The rain pounded on the roof like an army marching overhead. The radio spat static, and the headlights cut through the blackness as they crawled down the flooded road. Jack tried to reach the sheriff's frequency, but the storm had knocked out most of the signals. The hum of interference filled the cab. He stole glances at Emily. Through the dim dashboard light, her cheeks flushed red from cold, her lips pale, her eyes half closed from exhaustion. She looked like a ghost of childhood, half here, half gone. Rex stayed pressed against her, his tail flicking softly whenever she moved. "We'll get you warm," Jack said under his breath, though she was already drifting off. He gripped the wheel tighter, every bump in the road echoing in his chest. The road toward Silver Hollow was flooded near the bridge, the current too strong to cross. Jack cursed quietly, turning down a smaller road that wound toward the forest line. His cabin wasn't far, just a few miles out, up a sloping hill where the air still smelled like pine. The drive took longer than it should have. Twice he had to slow to avoid fallen branches, the truck's tires sliding in the mud. But through it all, he kept his focus on the girl beside him. She slept fitfully, her small hands still gripping the edge of the basket, the puppy inside giving faint, weak sounds. "Hang in there," he whispered. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or to himself. When they finally pulled up to the cabin, the rain had eased into a steady drizzle. Jack carried Emily inside. The air smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. He set her on the couch and knelt by the fireplace, stacking logs and striking a match. The flame caught quickly, spreading light and warmth through the room. He poured a small mug of warm milk from the kettle he'd left on the stove earlier, then returned to her side. "Here," he said quietly. "Small sips." She obeyed without a word, her eyes fixed on the dancing firelight. Rex lay at her feet, his muzzle resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. For the first time that night, silence settled. The storm outside softened into a distant hum. Emily's breathing grew slow, and even as she drifted toward sleep, the puppy curled against her side. Jack sat across from her, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire. He felt the heaviness in his chest, the old ache that came when duty found him again, uninvited. The words she'd spoken echoed through the quiet. Victor Hale. The name carried the promise of violence, of something waiting beyond the safety of these four walls. But for now, there was warmth, and the fragile peace of two lost souls and one loyal dog sharing the same small light against the storm. Jack leaned back, his eyes on the glow flickering across the walls. He watched the girl sleeping soundly, Rex curled close to her, the puppy twitching softly in its dreams. The rain tapped gently against the window pane, a rhythm that felt almost forgiving. He exhaled slowly, his voice barely more than a whisper. Victor Hale. The name hung in the air, heavy as thunder before it breaks. He looked once more at the child, alone, brave, and broken, and knew that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that had just begun inside his heart. Morning came gray and heavy, with the kind of rain that never really stopped, just softened into a mist that clung to the skin and soaked through clothes no matter how thick they were. The world outside Jack's cabin looked washed out, muted, as if all color had been taken by the night before. Inside, the fire had burned down to ash, the faint smell of smoke still hanging in the air. Jack stood by the window, his coffee cooling in his hand, watching the road disappear into the fog. Behind him, Emily slept curled up on the couch, a blanket tucked under her chin, Rex lying close by like a sentinel who hadn't closed his eyes once. The storm had calmed, but something inside Jack hadn't. The name Victor Hale hadn't left his mind all night. It circled there like thunder waiting to return. He reached for the old rotary phone on the counter and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. The voice that answered was rough but familiar. "Silver Hollow Police Department, Monroe speaking." Jack smiled faintly, a sound of relief slipping through his breath. Sarah Monroe, 30 years old, was once his partner during an interstate rescue program years ago. Sharp, steady, and stubborn as a stone. She had left the service to wear a badge, but the soldier in her never quite left. "Sarah, it's Jack," he said. "I need your help. There's a little girl, Emily. Says her stepfather's name is Victor Hale." The line went quiet for a moment before Sarah replied, her tone low and tense. "That name's shown up before. You'd better let me see." A few hours later, Jack's truck pulled up outside a rundown property at the far edge of Silver Hollow. The rain hadn't let up, and the house in front of them looked as if it had been rotting for years. Shingles hung loose on the roof, one window was broken, and a half-collapsed porch leaned toward the muddy yard. Sarah stepped out of her patrol car, pulling the hood of her navy jacket tight. Her left shoulder was still stiff from an old injury, and every cold day reminded her of it. "This is it?" she asked. Jack nodded, his expression grim. "Emily said she lived here, with Hale." Rex leapt down from the truck bed, paws sinking into the mud, nose twitching. The smell of damp wood and stale alcohol rolled from the house like a warning. They entered through the front door, which hung crooked on its hinges. The air inside was thick, mold, whiskey, and something sour beneath it. The furniture was overturned, the wallpaper peeling, and the floor was littered with bottles and cigarette burns. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, landing on the far corner where a table had been shoved against the wall. "Smells like he left in a hurry," she muttered. Jack moved slowly through the living room, scanning every surface with the kind of discipline that never left him. Then Rex growled, low and deep, the kind of sound that came from instinct, not training. Jack followed the dog's gaze. There, across the wooden floor, ran a dark trail, dried blood, stretching from the middle of the room toward the kitchen. Sarah crouched down, her gloved fingers tracing the edge of the stain. "It's old," she said, "maybe weeks." Near the end of the trail lay a cracked leather belt, stiff and dark with dried blood. A few strands of hair clung to it, pale and fragile against the brown wood. Sarah's jaw tightened. "He beat someone here." Jack said nothing. He just stared at the blood until his reflection blurred in it. Rex sniffed the air, his tail stiff, then moved toward a heap of clothes beside the counter. He pulled free a torn jacket, the fabric faded red with soot. Jack bent down to take it. The letters stitched into the chest stopped his breath. Daniel Parker, Fire and Rescue Unit. He closed his eyes for a moment. Daniel Parker, Emily's father. Sarah glanced at the patch on the jacket and exhaled slowly. So the kid wasn't lying. She stood and pulled a folded file from her coat pocket. Hale's been running a private freight line, Hale Freight Logistics. Small outfit, mostly unlicensed hauls, cash payments, no record keeping. I tried to flag him 6 months ago for smuggling, but couldn't get the warrant through. Jack turned the jacket over in his hands, the fabric still faintly smelling of smoke. "He's using trucks to move more than freight," he said quietly. "The kind of people who deal in silence." Sarah looked at him and nodded once, both of them understanding what wasn't said. In the back of the kitchen, a small metal drawer hung open. Sarah pulled it free and found a stack of damp papers bound with a rubber band. She set them on the counter, flipping through carefully. Invoices, she murmured. Hail Freight Logistics. Deliveries routed through the North logging trails. The last one listed here. Old Sawmill, Route 16B. She tapped the address with her pen. That mill's been closed for nearly 10 years. Jack studied the paper. The ink had bled from rain, but the words were still legible enough to sting. Outside, Rex barked once, sharp and warning. Jack moved to the porch, the cold air hitting him full in the face. The yard stretched out into open field, puddles gleaming like broken glass under the faint daylight. Near the steps, muddy footprints trailed toward the fence, large boots, heavy soles, the kind worn by men who work or hunt. He crouched down, tracing one print with his hand. It was fresh. Next to it lay a cigarette butt, the smoke still curling faintly from the wet grass. Jack straightened, scanning the tree line. Something moved, a shadow just beyond the fence, barely visible through the rain. A man stood there, watching. For a long moment, neither moved. The stranger wore a dark coat and a black hat pulled low, his posture too calm for a passerby. Then, as Jack stepped forward, the man turned and disappeared into the mist as silently as he had appeared. "We've got company," Jack said, his voice flat but his pulse racing. Sarah joined him, eyes narrowing as she followed his gaze. "He's keeping tabs," she said. "Hale knows she's gone." Rex barked again, the sound echoing into the trees. The rain began to fall harder, pattering against the tin roof like a heartbeat gone unsteady. Sarah packed the invoices into a plastic bag and slipped it into her coat. "I'll run these through the system," she said. "See if anyone's been moving trucks out near the mill." Jack gave a slow nod, but his mind was elsewhere. On the man in the rain, the eyes that had lingered too long, the sense that something larger had just started to unfold. The wind carried the faint scent of diesel and smoke, and for a second he could almost hear the sound of a distant engine idling. "We're not dealing with some drunk who lost control," he said. "This place stinks of something organized." Sarah looked at him, rain dripping from her hood. "And you think he's still here?" she asked. Jack didn't answer. He glanced down at the invoice in his hand, the paper soft from water, the ink blurring but still legible. Old Sawmill, Route 16B, North Ridge Forest. The words stared back at him like coordinates to something darker than either of them wanted to imagine. He folded the paper once, slipping it into his jacket pocket. The sky rumbled again, thunder rolling through the valley like a slow, distant drum. Rex pressed close to his leg, the fur along his spine rising slightly. Jack reached down, his hand resting briefly on the dog's neck, then looked back toward the road, his voice quiet but steady. "No, Sarah," he said. "He's not just here. He's waiting." The rain returned that evening, not as a storm but as a steady curtain that never stopped whispering against the roof. The hills of Silver Hollow disappeared under a gray haze, and the lights from Jack's cabin flickered softly in the fog like a heartbeat in the dark. Inside, warmth glowed from the fireplace, the faint crackle of wood mixing with the quiet breathing of a sleeping child. Emily lay wrapped in a wool blanket on the couch, one hand still curled around the little puppy she had named Hope. The air smelled faintly of pine and tea, and beside her sat Clara Johnson, a 60-year-old retired nurse with kind brown eyes and short gray curls. She wore a light sweater and a faded blue scarf, the look of someone who had spent her life tending to others and never quite learned how to rest. Clara had come as soon as Jack called that morning. She'd cared for half the town's children at one point, and when Jack said the girl had nowhere to go, she didn't hesitate. "She's safe here," Clara had said, her voice calm but firm. She spent the afternoon making soup, humming softly under her breath as Emily watched with the cautious trust of a wounded bird. Now, as the night deepened, Clara sat in a rocking chair near the window, knitting by the firelight, listening to the rain and the faint hum of the wind. Rex lay stretched out near the door, his head resting between his paws, his amber eyes half open, every sense alert, even in the quiet. The peace inside the cabin felt fragile, as though one wrong sound could shatter it. It came just after 9, a knock, soft at first, then harder, echoing against the wooden door. Clara froze, the yarn slipping from her hand. Rex lifted his head, ears pricked, muscles tense beneath his fur. The knock came again, heavier this time, followed by a man's voice, low, rough, and tired from cigarettes. "This the house of Jack Carter?" The words dragged through the rain, muffled but sharp enough to cut the silence. Clara rose slowly, heart thudding. "Who's asking?" she called, trying to sound braver than she felt. A pause, then the voice again. "I'm looking for a little girl, blonde hair, about 6 years old." The words chilled her blood. Rex stood now, tail stiff, growl rumbling deep in his chest. Clara took one cautious step toward the door, fingers hovering above the latch. "There's no child here," she said firmly. "You've got the wrong house." The man gave a low, humorless chuckle. "Funny. They said a vet took her in. Guess you and your dog there don't want to make this easy." Before Clara could respond, Rex barked, loud, fierce, a sound that rattled the window panes. The knock turned to pounding. Clara backed away, heart hammering, and shouted, "Leave before I call the police!" Outside, footsteps splashed in the mud, retreating fast. Rex lunged toward the door, claws scraping the wood, barking in quick bursts of fury. Clara held him back, her voice trembling. "It's all right, boy, he's gone." But as she reached for the deadbolt, she noticed something lying on the porch, a small plastic card half buried in the puddle near the step. She hesitated, then cracked the door open just enough to reach it. Mud streaked the surface, but the letters were clear enough to read under the porch light. "Hale Freight Logistics, Victor Hale." Her breath caught. She slammed the door shut, locking both bolts this time. Rex paced near the entrance, restless, nose twitching at the wet air that leaked through the cracks. Clara moved to the phone and dialed Jack's number with trembling fingers. The line rang twice before he picked up. His voice, steady but tired, answered, "Clara, everything okay?" She swallowed hard. "Jack, someone came to the door, said your name, said he's looking for a blonde girl." There was silence on the other end, long, heavy, then a quiet sigh. "Did you see his face?" Jack asked. "No, just his voice. He dropped something, one of those work IDs. Jack, it had Hale's name on it." When Jack returned half an hour later, headlights swept across the wet trees and stopped at the cabin. He stepped out into the rain without a word, his olive jacket glistening under the porch light, water dripping from the brim of his black cap. Sarah Monroe climbed out of the passenger side behind him, flashlight in hand, scanning the tree line. "He's getting bolder," she said, her voice low. "They're watching." Inside, Clara handed Jack the muddy ID card. He turned it over in his palm, the name smudged but visible. Victor Hale. The plastic creaked under the pressure of his grip. "He knows," Jack murmured. "He knows she's alive." Sarah crouched by the window, studying the muddy prints on the porch. "Boot size 11, maybe 12, she said. "Industrial treads. Same pattern we saw at the house." She glanced back at Jack. "We don't have time to wait for a warrant." Jack nodded, already pulling on his gloves. "We're not waiting." He looked toward the couch, where Emily stirred in her sleep, unaware of the storm gathering outside her small world. "She's just a kid," he said quietly. "No one else is going to protect her." Rex came to his side, tail low, eyes fixed on the window. Jack knelt down, scratching behind his ear. "You ready, partner?" The dog pressed closer, a low growl vibrating through his chest like an answer. Sarah grabbed her radio, clipped it to her belt, and said, "If we move now, we can reach Old Sawmill by midnight. That's north through the ridge. Isolated, no cell signal. Perfect for someone hiding freight or people." Clara placed a gentle hand on Jack's arm. "Be careful," she said softly. "That man, his voice didn't sound human." Jack gave her a faint, tired smile. "Monsters rarely do, Clara." Outside, the rain thickened, turning to sheets again. Jack loaded the truck with his flashlight, his sidearm, and a folded map marked with Sarah's notes. Rex jumped into the back seat without hesitation, his breath fogging the glass. Sarah climbed in beside him, adjusting her shoulder holster. Jack started the engine, headlights piercing the mist as the tires bit into the mud. The cabin lights faded behind them, swallowed by the darkness of the hills. Neither spoke for a long time. The wipers beat a steady rhythm, the sound almost hypnotic. Then, Jack broke the silence, his eyes fixed on the narrow road ahead. "We're not chasing ghosts," he said quietly. "We're taking back what's left of a family." As they left the last streetlight of town behind, the forest closed in. Tall pines bending under the weight of rain, branches scraping against the sides of the truck. The dirt road narrowed to a single lane, twisting through the dark like a vein through stone. Lightning flashed, illuminating the road sign half hidden by ivy. Route 16B, Northridge Forest. Sarah checked her watch. "We've got maybe 20 miles, she said. "If that place is what I think it is, we'll find him." Jack didn't answer. He pressed harder on the gas, the engine humming low. Rex lifted his head, ears twitching, sensing the shift in his master's heartbeat. Rain battered the windshield harder now, almost horizontal, the sound filling the cab like the roar of a crowd. Jack leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he guided the truck deeper into the woods. "You smell it too, don't you?" he said to Rex, who gave a short growl in reply. The dog's body tensed, muscles rippling beneath his wet coat. Sarah glanced out at the blur of trees and shadows, her hand hovering near her gun. Somewhere far off, thunder cracked like a warning. Jack gripped the wheel tighter, his jaw set. "Now it's our turn," he said softly, eyes on the road ahead. "Our turn to bring justice, kid." The forest loomed dark and endless, the rain falling harder as Jack's truck crawled along the muddy road leading into the northern ridge. Lightning cracked across the sky, revealing the skeletal outline of a structure in the distance, a decaying sawmill swallowed by trees and time. The wind carried the faint scent of oil and ash. Sarah tightened her grip on the flashlight, her jaw clenched, eyes scanning the tree line for movement. Rex stood in the back seat, head near the window, nose twitching, the low rumble of a growl vibrating deep in his throat. "He's close," Jack murmured, voice steady but low. The headlights caught the edge of a rusted sign that read, "Old Sawmill, Restricted Property." He killed the engine, and the world fell silent except for the rain. They moved on foot, boots sinking into the slick mud, flashlights cutting thin beams through the mist. The sawmill towered ahead, massive, broken, its roof sagging like the ribcage of something long dead. From the far side of the structure, a faint yellow glow pulsed against the storm, flickering as though from a single weak bulb. Sarah crouched beside Jack, her hand hovering near the grip of her pistol. "Lights coming from below," she whispered. Jack nodded once. "Basement level." Rex sniffed the air again and whimpered, a rare sound from a dog trained to face gunfire. "Blood," Jack said quietly, almost to himself. "He smells blood." They reached a side entrance, its door half hanging from the hinges, rainwater dripping from the rusted handle. Jack pushed it open with his shoulder, the wood creaking like a warning. Inside, the air was thick with mold and gasoline, the walls lined with old saw blades and broken crates. The floorboards groaned under their steps. Sarah's flashlight caught something dark on the ground, dried streaks that led toward the back of the hall. The smell grew stronger with every step. Rex's hackles rose, his tail stiff, body coiled like a spring. They followed the trail to a narrow stairwell leading down into the basement. The light below flickered, dancing against the damp concrete. The basement was a tomb of shadows. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow, rhythmic drops. Jack moved first, weapon drawn, the beam of his light sweeping across crates and tangled wires. In the far corner, a movement, a flicker of reflection. He aimed instinctively. Then his breath caught. 3 figures sat slumped against the wall, bound tightly with coarse rope. One was a woman, thin, pale, her brown hair matted to her face. 2 men beside her hung their heads, their skin gray with exhaustion, but still breathing. Sarah rushed forward, checking pulses. "Alive," she said quickly. "Barely." Jack knelt beside the woman, cutting through the rope with his knife. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we're here to get you out." She stirred faintly, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. My daughter," her voice cracked. Jack froze. "Emily," he whispered. The woman's eyes fluttered open, tears mixing with dirt on her face. "Yes." Before he could answer, the silence shattered. A slow, mocking clap echoed through the chamber, followed by a voice that sent a chill through the room. "Touching reunion, Carter." From the shadows stepped Victor Hale, tall and broad, rain dripping from his black coat. His beard was unkempt, eyes wild with the calm fury of a man who enjoyed control too much. 3 men followed behind him, armed, their faces hidden beneath wet hoods. Hale raised his gun, smiling. "I knew you'd come. You soldiers are predictable. You can't resist saving broken things." Jack stood, placing himself between the captives and the gun. "It's over, Hale," he said. "You've got nowhere to run." Hale chuckled, the sound dry as gravel. You think this is about running? No, Jack. This is about finishing what should have been done months ago. You, the girl, the mess you made by bringing light where it wasn't wanted. The first shot split the air like lightning. Sarah ducked behind a steel beam, returning fire as sparks flew from the concrete. Jack fired twice, forcing one of Hale's men down. Rex lunged forward, teeth bared, taking another by the arm and dragging him screaming to the ground. The basement erupted into chaos, the sound of gunfire drowned by rain and the roar of fury from the German shepherd. Hale fired again, the bullet grazing Sarah's shoulder, spinning her against the wall. I'm fine, she shouted, blood soaking her sleeve. Jack moved fast, firing in bursts. 1, 2, 3. The last of Hale's men fell, his weapon clattering across the floor. Hale stumbled backward toward a stack of fuel drums, rage twisting his face. You don't get to play hero here, Hale hissed. You think saving her changes what you are? You're still the man who couldn't save his own unit. Jack's eyes darkened, the rain and gunpowder painting him in the dim light. You're right, he said, but tonight I'm saving someone else's. Rex barked, a deep, thunderous sound, and Hale's eyes darted toward the dog. In that heartbeat of distraction, Jack fired. The shot struck Hale's arm, knocking the gun loose, but Hale's hand slammed down on a nearby valve. A spark ignited somewhere unseen. The explosion tore through the floor, fire swallowing air. Flames roared to life, rolling up the walls in waves. Smoke filled the basement, choking and blinding. Jack grabbed Sarah's arm, dragging her toward the captives. Cut them loose, he yelled. The heat seared through his jacket as he slashed the ropes free. Rex circled them, barking furiously, searching for a way out. A beam crashed behind them, sparks flying. This way, Sarah shouted, pointing to a small service hatch near the back. Jack hoisted the unconscious woman, Emily's mother, over his shoulder. The two rescued men stumbled after them, coughing, blinded by smoke. Rex ran ahead, guiding the way, nose pressed low to the ground despite the fire biting at his fur. The hatch groaned open with a metallic scream, and cool night air rushed in. One by one they crawled through, the rain outside colliding with the flames in a hiss of steam. Jack stumbled out last, dragging Sarah by the arm. Behind them, the sawmill burned like a dying sun, orange and red bleeding into the black sky. Hale's voice echoed once, faint and bitter, before disappearing beneath the roar of fire. They collapsed in the mud, coughing, gasping for breath. The rain poured harder, extinguishing what was left of the inferno. Jack laid the woman gently on the wet grass, checking her pulse. Steady, weak, alive. Sarah knelt beside the two men, wrapping a torn sleeve around her shoulder. Rex circled once before lying beside Jack, his chest heaving, patches of fur singed black. Jack looked down at him, a small smile forming despite the exhaustion. You did good, partner, he said quietly. The dog gave a faint wag of his tail. In the distance, sirens began to wail, late, but coming. Jack stood, the rain running down his face, and looked toward the forest edge. Through the blur of smoke, he thought he saw a figure, broad-shouldered, limping, vanishing into the trees. Hale, he muttered, but he didn't follow. Not tonight. Not with lives to save. He turned back to Sarah, who was already radioing for medical support. The storm was breaking apart above them, the clouds thinning into a pale dawn. Hours later, the hospital lights were soft and warm. Emily sat beside her mother's bed, her small hand resting against the woman's bandaged fingers. When her mother stirred, the girl leaned in, whispering her name through tears. Jack stood by the doorway, his clothes still damp, his hands in his pockets. Beside him, Rex sat quietly, his coat burned in patches, a faint scar down his flank. As Emily looked up and smiled through her tears, Rex lifted his head and wagged his tail. Jack's throat tightened. Heroes, he thought, didn't always wear uniforms, or need applause. Sometimes they just showed up when the rain refused to stop. A week had passed since the night the forest burned, and the small town of Silver Hollow had changed. Rain still came, but softer now, like a reminder rather than a warning. The smell of smoke had faded from the trees, replaced by the scent of pine and wet earth. The people spoke in quieter tones, at diners, at the gas station, outside the post office. Words like raid, arrest, and justice passing between them like secrets they couldn't quite believe had finally come true. On the radio, the morning news reported that state and federal officers were coordinating a full-scale operation against Hale Freight Logistics, uncovering years of smuggling, trafficking, and bribery buried under layers of false names and stolen trucks. The voice was calm, almost routine, but for those who lived in Silver Hollow, it wasn't just another headline. It was the end of something dark. In the middle of that week, the town woke to the sound of helicopters circling above the ridge road. Police vehicles lined the streets, and agents in dark jackets moved through the rain, hauling boxes of documents from the old freight office near the train yard. Jack watched from the edge of Main Street, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his black cap pulled low. Rex sat beside him, tail resting on the wet pavement, eyes following every movement with quiet attention. Sarah Monroe stood near the sheriff's truck, speaking with the state marshal, her left arm still in a sling. When she caught Jack's eye, she smiled faintly. "It's over," she said. He nodded once. "Yeah, for them." The marshal turned toward them and said the words Jack had been waiting to hear all week. "Victor Hale's been caught. Idaho border, 40 miles west. He didn't make it far." They said Hale had been hiding in a freight yard near the border, trying to bribe his way across using one of his old routes. When cornered, he'd gone quiet, offering no fight, no excuse, just a smirk that said he thought it would never come to this. To most, it was closure. To Jack, it was the dull ache of relief mixed with something that wasn't victory. Justice, maybe, but not the kind that ever feels clean. The town gathered that evening in front of the courthouse, umbrellas crowding the square, to watch as the sheriff read the official statement. Hale was in custody, and the victims had been accounted for. The applause came slow, hesitant, then grew louder, spreading across the crowd like the sound of rain on rooftops. Rex barked once, sharp and proud, and even that small sound drew laughter. Inside the community center later that night, a ceremony was held. The walls smelled of coffee and wet coats, the floor polished for the first time in years. Jack stood near the back with Sarah and Clara Johnson, who looked tired but radiant in her gray cardigan and soft blue scarf. A state officer stepped up to the podium, reading the commendations for bravery, for selfless courage, and decisive action under life-threatening circumstances, he said. "We recognize Jack Carter, Sarah Monroe, and Rex." There was polite applause, the kind that fills a room without quite warming it. Jack nodded toward Sarah, but she only smiled, eyes shining under the dim lights. "You still hate the spotlight," she teased quietly. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Always will." Later, away from the speeches and flashing cameras, Jack found himself outside in the cool night air. The rain had stopped for once, the streets reflecting the glow of the street lamps like mirrors. He stood beneath the awning of the center, watching as people drifted home in small clusters. Behind him, the door creaked open, and a small voice called out, "Mr. Jack!" He turned to see Emily, her blonde hair brushed neatly, a blue ribbon tied around it. Her mother, pale but recovering, stood a few steps behind her, leaning lightly on a cane. Emily ran to him, her shoes splashing through shallow puddles, and threw her arms around his waist. "You don't have to catch him anymore," she whispered, her voice muffled against his coat. "You already did. I just wanted to say thank you." Jack rested a hand on her shoulder, his throat too tight to speak at first. He finally managed, "You were the brave one, kid. You got yourself out." She looked up, eyes bright and sure. "But I wouldn't have made it if you hadn't stopped." Her mother smiled softly, her eyes meeting Jack's with a kind of gratitude words couldn't hold. Rex stepped forward, sniffing at Emily's hand before letting her scratch behind his ears. The girl giggled, and for a moment, the heaviness of the past seemed to melt into the night air. Sarah leaned against the doorway nearby, watching the three of them with quiet contentment. "She's tougher than half the recruits I've trained," she said under her breath. Days later, Silver Hollow gathered again, not to mourn, but to remember. The old church bell rang through the valley as people filled the hall for the memorial of the victims who hadn't made it out of Hale's shadow. Flowers lined the pews, their colors muted in the gray light filtering through stained glass. At the front, a small wooden sign bore the words, "Hope Shelter Foundation," in fresh paint. Clara Johnson stood at the pulpit, her voice steady but warm. "No child," she said, "should ever have to run alone through the rain, afraid and unseen." Her words carried through the silence, and even the hardest men in town bowed their heads. When she finished, the room rose in applause, not loud but long and full of feeling. After the service, Clara explained her plan: a foundation for children who had suffered abuse, a place for healing and safety. The first shelter would open in town, named after the little puppy that had survived the storm. "We'll call it Hope," she said, smiling down at Emily, who was holding the now-growing pup in her arms. A reminder that light can survive anything, even a night like that. Sarah offered to help with outreach, promising to bring in the sheriff's support. Jack said little, but when Clara asked if he'd join the board, he only smiled faintly. "You'll need someone to fix the fences," he said. She nodded knowingly. "And to make sure the doors stay open." By the end of that week, the rain had returned again, softer than before. Jack walked along the dirt road outside town, his boots leaving shallow prints in the puddles. Beside him trotted Rex, his fur darker where it had burned, tail swinging in a lazy rhythm. Up ahead, Emily skipped along the edge of the road, her little crutches gleaming in the pale light, her laughter bright against the drizzle. The puppy, Hope, ran circles around her, tumbling into every puddle he could find. Jack watched them with a quiet smile, the ache in his chest not painful anymore, just real. "You ever think it ends?" Sarah asked as she joined him from behind, her voice half lost in the rain. Jack shook his head. "No," he said softly, "but maybe it changes." They stopped at the bend where the road curved toward the hills. The clouds broke apart just enough to let the sunset through, thin streaks of gold spilling across the wet ground. The light caught the puddles, turning them into tiny mirrors of the sky. Emily turned back toward him, waving with her free hand. "Come on, Mr. Jack," she called. Rex barked once and started forward. Jack adjusted his cap, the word veteran gleaming faintly in the dying light, and followed. The sound of his boots mixed with the patter of rain, a steady rhythm that carried them toward whatever peace the world still had to offer. The sun dipped lower, and for a brief, golden moment, the world felt still. 3 figures moved down the glistening road, a soldier, a child, and a dog, silhouetted against the quiet shimmer of the evening. No one spoke. There was no need. The storm had passed, but its memory remained, not as pain, but as proof. In Silver Hollow, where the rain once washed away hope, it now left something behind. Something small, something brave, something worth saving. Sometimes real heroism doesn't come from power, but from quiet hearts that choose kindness when the world turns cold. Jack, Emily, and Rex remind us that compassion can save more than a life. It can save hope itself. In every storm, there are still people who will stop, listen, and help someone lost in the rain. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what kindness means to you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that honor love, courage, and second chances. May God bless you and everyone who still believes that goodness is never lost.